Riverside Police, what's your emergency?
I think I found a dead body.
Sorry?
Dead body.
There's a dead body?
Yeah.
So someone slipped in and drowned, or actually, is this a murder scene?
It looks like it's a teenager, really.
Looks like a teenager.
Why was a young man's life taken in such a tragic way?
There's something dark going on underneath that relationship.
It's about status, power, control.
It's reckless and it's intentional.
We have a 2-hour time period when we don't know where they've been and what they've done. Is there a killer on the loose? We need the evidence to tell us.
A dog walker going along the banks of the River Hull spotted something which looked to them suspicious.
Can you tell if it's a male or a female?
Male, I think.
When they took a closer look, they could see that it was the body just on the edge of the riverbank.
And you say you've actually touched him and there was no response?
I took him in my foot.
It's obviously a young person, probably aged between 16 and 20.
There's no chance that he's asleep or anything, there's no breathing or anything like that I could see.
No.
Police cordon off a stretch of the River Hull. It's not yet clear how the teenager died.
The body isn't fully submerged, the head is slightly, but the majority of the body is just lying on the riverbank.
Suppose to a passerby, it may have appeared as if this is somebody who had got into difficulties in the river itself.
No obvious signs of murder. No visible signs of a struggle or stab wounds or anything like that. A whole number of options come to mind, but you must go with what the forensics tell you.
You always have to treat any scene where a body is as a suspicious scene. Is the death natural causes? Is it suicide? Has someone fallen in the river? Have they been drunk and fallen in? Or is it murder? The role of a crime scene manager is to rule out the different hypotheses.
A pathologist is called to the scene.
The first thing to do is identify the body. Often, once you know the identity of a body, the rest of it falls into place.
CSIs search the cordon, but find no personal belongings.
The main way that we can identify someone quite quickly is on fingerprints. If someone's known on police record, you only need a small bit of fingerprint to be able to identify who they are.
The teenager's fingerprints are sent off to be run through the database, while police check missing persons reports and call on nearby homes.
There's quite a large housing estate on one side of the riverbank. Your job, as well as to investigate and bring closure for the loved ones, is also to, if you like, reassure the public.
Just hours after finding the man, the fingerprints hit a match. He's identified as Connor Lyons.
He was 17, but probably looked about 15 or 16. He's extremely a popular young lad.
He was a local boy, a local teenager, really at the cusp of adulthood. He was just about to make those big moves, leaving school, starting work. We knew that there would have been a lot of interest in the area from that community because it wasn't really clear how he was there, why he was there.
He's on the fingerprint register, so he's got a criminal conviction. But the criminal conviction is for low-level social crime, so nothing earth-shattering. He's not a career criminal. He's just a young lad that's probably lost his way a little bit. He'd turned a bit of a corner and was more focused on what he wanted to do, and he was going to go to college and learn to be a plumber. So he had a career in mind, a well-paid career as well. He was kind-hearted, and no one had a bad word to say for him.
Connor lives less than a mile from the crime scene.
The police had the awful job of going round to his parents to confirm that they found his body.
It's very difficult to tell the family that their loved one has died in suspicious circumstances, and you haven't come to any conclusions yet, because they want answers. They want to make sense of it.
Connor's family tell them he went out around 8 p.m. He was riding his bike with his loyal companion Callie by his side.
From speaking to family, Connor had a dog called Callie, and his dog literally was by his side day and night, and he had a lead for him. The time that Connor went missing, the dog also goes missing.
Callie was found alone later that night, hungry and nervous, helping narrow down Connor's final movements. CSIs at the river look for clues as to what has happened.
The victim, Connor, was missing a gold bracelet, bike, and his mobile phone.
There was a gold bracelet that had been bought for him as a present. It did raise a suspicion as to whether or not there had been some form of foul play.
The fact that these are missing then tends to point towards, was this a robbery?
Amid the uncertainty, speculation is rife.
This would have caused a ripple effect within the community. Hearing the news of a young person known well within the community, knowing the family within the community, people start talking and people start coming up with their own theories and their own conclusions to what was going on in that situation.
There'll be all sorts of stuff on the rumour mill. It's a two-way street. The public want to know what's going on, but equally the police want to harvest any information or intelligence there is that might help their inquiry. There was a rumour circulating. He was talking about suicidal tendencies.
There was the seed of potentially Connor got into problems with others, potentially involving drugs, and that he may have been harmed by those people.
With rumours swirling, the team urgently needs to determine how Connor died.
If this is murder, how can the crime scene tell us the story as to what has happened?
Is it a suicide? Is it foul play? Lots of question marks at the moment, and no real answers.
The body of 17-year-old aspiring plumber Connor Lyons has been found on the banks of the River Hull.
The reaction in the newsroom was obviously one of sympathy for the people involved, but also you switch into a professional gear. It's a big news story with a lot of interest in the area because he formed part of the community where, sadly, he died. Questions being asked were, how on earth did it happen? Why did it happen? And really, is it a safe place for my children to go?
But after finding no obvious injuries, forensics still need to determine how he died and if anyone else is involved.
Until you've had a post-mortem examination on the body, you don't really know what you're looking for. You have to set your parameters quite large. There's a lot of mud around. I would expect that the suspects would be covered in mud, or at least have mud on their lower clothing, their footwear, and their bottoms of their trousers. Soil samples are a really important sample to take from these kind of crime scenes because they may link back to an offender. If you find a pair of shoes or clothing with soil on them, you can match that. Soil can be really distinctive to a particular area. The soil samples will be taken from multiple areas around where the body's been found. You're not looking at a really deep soil sample because if there's any transfer of material, it's going to be the top surface.
They also focus on finding Connor's missing phone, bike, and a gold bracelet he was wearing.
There is a possible motive of robbery.
If someone's been found on a riverbank, there may be items that have been thrown into the river close to where that body is, or items might have fallen off the body.
Police divers enter the water.
Searching a riverbed in the UK is very difficult. It's a long, laborious process. The visibility in the water is virtually zero, and so the police divers would be doing a fingertip search. It's a scientific process to try and determine how wide an area they need to search. Depending on how fast the river's flowing and how strong the current is, that could wash away evidence. It could move evidence.
With rumours flying around about how Connor died, they need to know more about his life.
Straight away, the police have got to do an intelligence search to find out what they know about Connor and who his known associates are, because that may well point to foul play. There's clearly evidence that Connor was a very popular, nice young man.
Connor moved to the Bransholme estate in Hull 3 years ago.
The Bransholme estate sits on the outskirts of the city to the east of the River Hull. The estate was built in the 1960s and 70s, and at the time it was described as the biggest council estate in Europe. But despite its size, I would say it still retains a village feel. It had its own shops, had its own pubs, had its own churches, schools. And there is a strong community identity. It tends to be very much a case of everybody really knows everybody else. Connor was a very well-known character on the Bransholme estate. We quickly became aware of his popularity through social media.
Shocked by his death, Connor's devastated friends post tributes to him on social media, and flowers from the community build at the crime scene.
The support Connor's family gave to each other and from the community was a lot of sympathy as well, losing somebody so young.
He turned his life around from having difficulties. He'd had a nasty accident a couple of years beforehand.
Police discover that Connor was badly injured in a serious bike accident.
Somebody's going through a traumatic experience. Their vulnerabilities are going to be heightened. That accident had a significant impact on his body and would have had a significant impact on his mental health. And through that traumatic experience, we've seen a decline and a change in Connor's behaviour. And what we start to see is a trajectory of change, getting involved in things that they shouldn't.
They've shut down all the youth clubs and there's nothing for kids to do.
Boredom amongst young people is an interesting factor. We're talking about economic climates and we're talking about lack of opportunity. We're talking about lack of resources that unfortunately sometimes get them caught up in the law.
Connor's family tell police he's been putting the past behind him, but in recent weeks, he hadn't been his usual self.
Connor was distracted. That could indicate he was having some difficulties with friends. It's important to speak to their peer group to find out what they were interested in, who their friends were, because normally, if someone's murdered, they will be known to the perpetrator.
To build up a picture of who was in Connor's life, detectives take statements from his associates and study their social media, and quickly have a lead.
There was a social media post in relation to the sale of Connor's missing bike.
Connor had a quite distinctive bicycle that he took everywhere. Everyone knew what it looked like.
Digital experts trace the seller.
Comes back to a guy called Cole Jarvis.
Jarvis lived on the Bransholme estate in the same area as Connor. They were, in fact, living quite close to each other.
He was somebody who had a group of friends, many of whom were significantly younger than he was. Connor was one of them.
Police learn Connor met 21-year-old Jarvis around 6 months ago, after approaching him for help fixing up a dirt bike.
Young people make relationships quite quickly. Both of them like bikes, both of them like motorcycles, and it's those things that may have that initial connection.
They're members of the same peer group, and it would seem that the common interest they had is playing video games, lamping, which is hunting for things like rabbits and stuff like that.
Digital forensic investigators find Jarvis has made several attempts to sell Connor's bike on social media.
On the face of it, it's evidence of suspicion of theft. So let's get him in, hear what he has to say. And it's very important in a murder investigation, you get a story from a suspect as quickly as you can, so that you can either corroborate it or otherwise.
Cole Jarvis is arrested on suspicion of theft.
He said, well, I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't got the bike. And says, I don't know Connor that well at all. He's, moved in beside me and we're acquaintances more than friends. It's when the police start delving into the peer group and what they've witnessed and what they've heard from Jarvis, they realise that Jarvis is telling a pack of lies.
With Jarvis in custody, an associate gives a statement. He saw Jarvis after 11 p.m. wearing wet and muddy trainers, riding Connor's distinctive bike.
One of the peer group says that he had squelchy shoes, which indicates he's been near water. His explanation for that was, because I'd taken the dog out for a walk. What is damning for him, he was seen riding that bike on the evening.
When confronted, Jarvis's account takes a U-turn.
He then changes his tune, and he tries to change the narrative in another direction.
Now Jarvis tells police he and Connor are in fact friends, and he did have his bike because Connor sold it to him.
Of all the items that went missing, this was in many senses, one of the more important ones, if not the most important, because it was a bike that was important to Connor, and would have been unlikely that he would have been trying to sell it.
What we see with Jarvis, he's continued to go out into the community and try and sell the bike. It suggests that he may be involved.
Why else did he sell the bike? Because he knows Connor won't need it because he's dead. That's my conjecture.
Detectives asked Jarvis if he went to the riverbank on the night of the 18th of January. He denies ever being there.
Now, it's not an offence to tell a lie to a police officer, but what it is good circumstantial evidence if you can prove that that suspect has lied to you, that his account or his narrative can't be relied upon because all these witnesses say this is actually what happened.
Intelligence officers scrutinizing the rumors spreading across the estate about how Connor died have found further evidence that Jarvis has been lying.
When the police start questioning the peer group, they suddenly starts to dawn on them that the one starting these rumors is actually Jarvis. And why is he doing it?
One involved the suggestion that he had been with Connor much earlier in the evening, when Connor had described wanting to hurt or kill himself. He also, to another friend, raised the possibility of Connor being looked for by people involved with drugs. There wasn't one clear picture.
None of which was true, of course. He's sowing a seed of disinformation, if you like, to go along with his narrative.
And in a sense, that implicated his role in this.
We're starting to get a bit more of a picture about a possible suspect, or certainly a person of interest. Doesn't say he's a murderer, but he's got questions to answer.
Needing to know more about Jarvis, detectives interrogate his digital footprint. He claims to have lost his phone, so they request his records from the network. Meanwhile, forensic search teams have recovered Connor's bike from inside a relative's shed.
The problem with a bike is that it's free for other people to touch and handle. Jarvis was actually known to the victim. He had legitimate access to the bike, so finding their DNA and fingerprints on there isn't really going to take the case that much further forward.
The team still needs forensics to tell them what happened to Connor on the riverbank.
You have to prove the cause of death. And the only person that can say that person died as a direct result of that action is a pathologist. They're the forensic experts.
The day after Connor was found, the results are in.
The cause of death wasn't straightforward. The initial indication was that Connor had died by drowning, which remained the case. That is how he died. But as the post-mortem was carried out and took place, there were other findings as well. There was damage and bruising around the neck area, which indicated a ligature may have been used. He also had petechiae, so that's the little blood vessels around your eyes and inside your lip, which can rupture on pressure being applied to the neck. Those injuries were not immediately apparent on the surface.
One possible scenario that the pathologist came up with was that Connor had been strangled and then left to drown. So he'd been left in the water knowing that he was going to drown because he'd been rendered unconscious. The second possible scenario was that he'd been strangled and then held forcibly under the water to drown.
Whichever way, The strangulation was an integral part to his death.
Were they callous enough just to leave him there to die? It matters not. In law, there is no difference.
Humberside Police officially have a murder investigation on their hands.
Now this is a murder inquiry. There's a massive shift in the investigation. What was used to strangle Conor? It's really important to try and find the ligature. Being able to find that vital piece of evidence may lead them to the offenders because they might well have their DNA as well as the victim's DNA.
The pathologist suggests that Conor may have been strangled with a rope over his waterproof jacket, which would explain why there are no visible markings on his skin.
A piece of rope had some significance because one of the witnesses had described Jarvis as making a reference to a piece of blue rope in the context of using it to tie people up.
Maybe Jarvis showing people the blue rope is just him showing what he's prepared to do.
This time, when police ask Jarvis about Conor's death, he answers no comment.
It can be tremendously frustrating because they can't really get to the root of the murder. There's lots of circumstantial evidence pointing to him as a person of interest, and he can't be eliminated, but he's implicated, but there is insufficient evidence to charge him with murder.
The team needs more time to find a forensic link between him and the crime scene.
There's a sense of urgency now. They haven't got an open-ended clock. What you have to do is prove the lies and prove the truth.
Police in Humberside are running out of time to question 21-year-old Cole Jarvis about the murder of his friend, 17-year-old Conor Lyons. A post-mortem has found that Conor was strangled before drowning in the River Hull, and circumstantial evidence points to Jarvis as his killer. But the team still needs a direct forensic link between him and the crime scene.
There's loads of circumstantial evidence, but there's nothing to put both of them at the murder scene.
There's very little evidence at that crime scene, so you have to then look at further types of evidence, so digital evidence, CCTV evidence.
The clock is ticking all this time. You've got to be resilient. You've got to keep pushing away.
Hull Magistrates Court grants the team a 36-hour custody extension. Using CCTV and phone data, police track Conor and Jarvis's movements. The pathologist determines Conor lay dead for several hours before he was discovered.
Time of death is crucial for forming the parameters of harvesting CCTV. So instead of doing a wide sweep, almost a fishing expedition, you've got time parameters that you can go to. Unfortunately, there's no CCTV of the actual murder scene, but you can look at when was the suspect and the victim last seen, were they seen together.
After leaving home, Conor meets up with Jarvis and they're seen out on the estate together. At around 8 p.m, CCTV captures two figures walking towards the crime scene.
The closest point to the river from the estate is only a 5-10 minute walk.
You were able to see a dog there which matched by description Conor's dog. It was not possible from the footage itself to necessarily make very clear identifications. A lot of time was spent analysing different pieces of CCTV footage to piece them together. You were able to see parts of the clothing which police were able to match up with some of the clothing that we know either Conor or Jarvis were wearing on the night.
The figure that was identified was wearing like a green Parker-style jacket, but they had very distinctive trainers, which covered reflective area that the CCTV picks up.
When you put them all together, you can start to say, well, this must be Conor, this must be Jarvis.
In this case, it indicates Conor would have gone there of his own volition, and we know that Conor and some of his friends were into lamping, which is basically hunting wildlife at night. And it may well be perfectly legitimate for him to go to that area by the riverbank late at night to do some lamping. And I suggest that's how he was lured to that area.
Officers continue to track the men on CCTV. Meanwhile, digital experts analysing phone data have discovered that Jarvis has been telling more lies about his friendship with Connor.
The data indicated that there were quite abusive text messages, that the relationship was deteriorating.
The relationship between Connor and Jarvis was a volatile one, which was capable of erupting into violence at times. The overall picture we had was that Jarvis appeared on the evidence to be the dominant person within that dynamic.
Jarvis is slightly older than the peer group he's mixing with, and I think people can draw the conclusion that he was a bit of a bully, that he tried to coerce younger kids into doing what he wanted them to do. My conjecture would be that he mixed with younger boys because he liked to be in control. He liked to be the boss, if you like.
He's going to have a little bit more knowledge as opposed to those young people that he may engage in. So it's almost like currency. Status, hierarchy, and control play a role in friendships. In every group and in every friendship group, there is going to be individuals that want to take lead, that want to be drivers. Jarvis being the leader of the pack in that type of environment, it would have definitely stroked his ego. Where Connor was slightly different is that he was an individual with a strong personality, and we know of loads of incidents where they clashed.
The team needs to find out if one of their fights turned fatal, and why. Shortly after 8 p.m, the figures are captured again on CCTV crossing John Newton Way, heading towards the River Hull, before they disappear from view. At 10:20 p.m, only one figure reappears.
Connor is not in that CCTV. There's a gap of 2 hours, which is consistent with what the pathologist says at the time of death. You can conclude that Connor's either dead or dying by the side of the river.
Detectives are convinced the grainy figure on CCTV is Jarvis fleeing the crime scene. He's seen heading back towards his home, but they still need further proof it's him. With the custody clock running out, a new key witness comes forward with incriminating evidence, just in time.
There was an eyewitness who was driving along Thomas Clarkson Way on his way to work at around 10:20. He's driven past. He's seen this person with a dog.
The area off Thomas Clarkson Way towards the river is pretty much open countryside, woodland, if you like. No CCTV, no street lighting. Large areas that isn't covered by any lighting at all. It's quite a desolate spot. There isn't any reason, good reason perhaps, to be in that area on foot at that time of night.
He was able to give a description of a man wearing broadly similar clothing which was worn by Jarvis that night and was with a dog that matched the description of Connor's. The eyewitness was able to pick out Jarvis on an identification parade, albeit he could not be sure. It fits the next sighting of the defendant on CCTV heading back towards his home area, only minutes from that sighting. It was one of the most remarkable pieces of evidence in the sense of I have no idea how he remembered seeing this person and the timing. It was quite extraordinary.
Investigators cross-reference the CCTV and eyewitness testimony with Jarvis's phone data.
At various stages on the CCTV footage, you could see that the person was using the telephone.
When they match the data, he's trying to sell the bicycle on the mobile phone. Now, that's very callous.
Humberside police arrest Cole Jarvis on suspicion of Connor's murder. A warrant is secured to search his home and related addresses.
There's certain things in an investigation that you would want to look for. In this case, you'd be definitely looking for any muddy clothing, any muddy shoes, because potentially you can tie that muddy clothing up to the riverbank where Conor was last seen alive. If an item's really muddy or really wet, the DNA may be inhibited because of the contamination. The bacteria may be from the mud and also from the wet. Say if it's been in water, a river or something. These shoes are quite heavily mud stained. They've got quite a lot of soil on the tops, on the uppers and the lowers of them. The forensic scientists might be able to ascertain where the soil has come from, and if they've got a soil sample from a site, they can compare the two and see if this soil from the shoe has been at the scene.
The trainers and mud samples collected at the crime scene are sent for comparison to soil expert Dr. Rosie Everett.
My role on the case is to understand whether there is any forensic ecological evidence that can help the police understand whether the suspect has been at the scene. The key pieces of evidence that I examined was a pair of trainers. They were caked in mud right up to the laces. We want to understand what is that mud, where has it come from, and whether there's anything microscopic that we can use to link the scene and the suspect.
Back at HQ, the intelligence team are still trying to understand what triggered Jarvis to kill Conor.
When you looked at the relationship between them and looked at the communications between them, what it did show is a volatile relationship where they were capable of issuing threats to each other, at times fighting like cat and dog.
The team discovers that 3 months ago, tensions boiled over after Jarvis sold a bike belonging to Conor without his permission.
Conor confronts him and says, "Where's my money for my bike?" And Jarvis refuses to give it to him. So at that stage, I would suggest it's when it really starts to turn toxic, because he's basically stealing from Conor for whatever reason.
There were messages in which it appeared Conor was making quite significant threats towards Jarvis. What was also apparent is that when you look at the messages, Jarvis had no fear of Conor, and you had messages from Jarvis to Conor saying, "Carry on testing me, you'll see what would happen."
There were text messages where Jarvis says that Conor is a cheeky, gobby little rat.
I think that maybe his power was challenged. I think that he felt that control he was losing because he's seen in Conor that he's an individual that didn't want to toe the line anymore. But when you have another individual that then stands out from the pack and says, "No, I don't like this. No, I'm not going to follow your instruction," and actually meet you at some point with conflict, it changes the whole dynamic. And then when it changes that whole dynamic, then someone like Jarvis now has to demonstrate authority, now has to demonstrate control.
A witness tells police Jarvis showed them a video of him whacking Conor on the leg with a boat paddle, causing Conor to cry while he laughed.
Jarvis was older and he was more well-developed. There would also be a physical imbalance.
There is evidence that he's stolen from Conor in the past. There is evidence of Jarvis's propensity to use violence and to be forceful in forcing Conor to do what he wanted him to do. If you put it all together, it's starting to show Jarvis's propensity for violence, and the violence is against Conor, who's younger and weaker. It shows some intent.
With the theft of Conor's bike the possible motive, searchers at Jarvis's home move into the garden.
Clearly, you're looking for a murder weapon.
A piece of blue rope was recovered, secreted or hidden in a garden area.
Intelligence has revealed that the offender's been boasting about using a rope to injure somebody. Is this the same rope? You have to kind of put your mind in the mindset of the person doing the attack and think, if I was going to strangle someone with a rope, how would I do it? And therefore that makes it easier for us to then target specific areas on an item for DNA transfer. The ends of the rope might have the offender's DNA on, and then the center of the rope might have the victim's DNA on. The trouble with this is it's got mud on it, and also it's been wet, so it might inhibit any DNA. So you need to try and avoid the areas of mud, which on something like this is quite difficult. Really get the swab into the nooks and crannies of the rope.
DNA samples from the rope are sent for profiling.
That rope was found to have the DNA of both Connor and Jarvis on, but in locations which would have been consistent with it being held as a ligature and potentially used on Connor.
A rope really is intimate, it's really close, and he would have seen and heard every emotion that would have came with it. So that level of violence really stands out.
That is evidence, good forensic evidence. If there's a rational or lawful explanation for that, don't you think he should have given it? Quite damning, I would say. And it's becoming quite a compelling case for the prosecution.
Cole Jarvis is charged with Connor's murder.
But it doesn't stop there. The police, up to the day of the trial, are still investigating and still asking questions, because he could come up with a cock and bull story saying, well, I've touched the rope, and so has Connor, because we're friends.
With Jarvis changing his story at every turn, police can't afford to leave a jury in any doubt. They still need to forensically link him to the crime scene.
If we don't get that crucial evidence at that scene, we potentially might lose the case at court. The initial thoughts are there's not much at that crime scene.
But after examining Jarvis's trainers, Dr. Rosie Everett has made a breakthrough.
My particular field is an area called diatoms, microscopic single-celled algae. So nothing you can see with the naked eye, but a piece of evidence that forms in water and soils. The suspect was very clear that they'd never been to that part of the River Hull. Actually, this evidence proves that they have.
It was a light bulb moment in the course of the investigation.
"21-year-old Cole Jarvis has been charged with murder. A rope recovered from his garden has returned a DNA match to 17-year-old Connor Lyons, consistent with the pathologist's findings that he was strangled before drowning in the River Hull. And now, microscopic forensic evidence has tied him to the crime scene.
Part of the reason that diatoms have become such an interest as a forensic evidence type is that if they come in contact with clothing, they get into the fibers and they lodge themselves between your fibers. And it's the same with footwear as well. We can look at them down the microscope to identify them to species level based on their shape, based on their size, and based on the features that they have as part of their structure.
Diatoms are unique to particular habitats.
So there are diatoms that are specific to the sea, there are diatoms that are specific to different river types, and there are different diatoms that grow within soils. So we can use that information to build a picture of where they've come from. The River Hull is a really interesting environment from a diatom perspective. It's a big estuary system. So the fresh water runs into the Humber estuary, which then obviously runs out into the North Sea. And it's a huge tidal system. And it means that you have quite a distinct diatom population from all three of those environments. What we can do, if an item of clothing or footwear has those diatoms on them, then we can try and make a link between, for example, a suspect and a scene.
Samples from Jarvis's trainers are compared to mud and water from the crime scene.
So when you're examining a piece of evidence, we have to be able to demonstrate, if there are diatoms in that evidence, that it's not just a quick contact, that it's across the shoe. In total, there were 6 samples. So one from the sole, one from the toe cap, one from the rear of the trainer, and then 3 systematically moving up the laces. Looking at the trainers under the microscope, they were covered in diatoms. This demonstrated that this shoe had been absolutely caked up to the laces in wet mud and had come in contact with all of these different diatom populations. And these diatoms matched exactly to the scene.
It's crucial because it directly points to Jarvis being at the murder scene, i.e. on the riverbank where Connor's body was found. It actually links him, the first bit of evidence actually links him physically to that riverbank.
8 months on from Connor's murder, Cole Jarvis's trial begins.
The atmosphere in any case where somebody has died is always tense and intense. And the whole range of emotions, from anger to frustration to anxiety to worry to fear, floating around the courtroom.
In a close-knit community like Bransholm, it's always very, very sad that a case like this can divide and split friendships.
It does add to the pressure. And it's those emotions that are there we also have to try to shield the jury from, because emotion isn't part of their decision-making.
In court, Jarvis showed a lack of remorse.
He was straight-faced, just stared at the wall, was totally disinterested in the proceedings.
He thought he was going to get away with it.
Jarvis's defense claim he has nothing at all to do with Connor's murder.
This case has got really good, compelling forensic evidence. You've got diatoms that have been found on the shoes and the clothing that was found in the river. You've got Connor's DNA on the rope. And also you've got CCTV that puts the victim with the offender at a certain time. All those 3 bits of compelling forensic evidence corroborate with each other. So you've got evidence that will link to other evidence to create a really compelling picture.
The only people that know what actually happened on the riverbank is Connor, who's dead, and Jarvis, who's made no comment. Now, if he had an explanation, it would have been in his interest to give it, but he never did.
After hearing the evidence for 3 weeks, it takes under 5 hours for the jury to come to a verdict. Jarvis is found guilty.
When the guilty verdict was announced in court, there were gasps from the public gallery. There was also a lot of tears, and emotions were running high. And it spilled out after the court into words, shouts, screams between the 2 sides on the courtroom steps outside.
Jarvis is sentenced to a minimum term of 21 years.
The judge, in his summing up, alludes to the fact that he believed that Jarvis lured Connor to the riverbank, probably saying, let's go lamping, which was popular with them both. He's gone there and the intention was to rob him of his gold bracelet and his bicycle. But ultimately, we don't know what was in Jarvis's mind because he's never told anybody. He was invited to, but he never did. He never gave evidence in his own defence. If he'd got away with this, I think he would have escalated his offending.
When we think about toxic relationships in any form, people may ask the question, why does a person stay? But oftentimes there may have been elements where they did have, connection. There may have been elements within their relationship where they had a bit of a laugh.
This is very sad. Connor was loved and respected by all. That's, replicated in the number of people that turned out at his funeral. There were hundreds of people there.
Amid COVID restrictions, 300 vehicles drive in convoy in his honour.
The memory of Connor is one that is beautiful, one that is inspirational, one that shows change.
He had plans for the future, and who knows where that have led. Sadly, we'll never know, because his life was taken from him before he could realise his ambitions.
was a horrible, violent attack on an elderly male. He was lying there bleeding. He'd been stabbed.
The nature of the stabbing is brutal. The perpetrator appears to be somebody who really wanted to kill.
Last thing that people would ever think would happen. All of a sudden, people in fearful of their lives.
Our role is to recover the evidence. We're collectors of evidence. But sometimes the evidence just isn't there to prove who's attacked and murdered this gentleman.
This was a real critical incident. I think it's fair to say we're all worried because it was escalating, the threat was increasing. We felt under a lot of pressure to catch this person.
So there's a lot of work going on in the background trying to find that evidence before it's too late, because the offender might strike again.
The call came in late in the evening about a man who'd been attacked in the street. This was clearly a very, very violent attack. The priority at a crime scene such as this, first of all, who is the person? So that's important for us to try and identify who they are. But then it's about gathering the best evidence. And we just want to catch the person before anything else happened.
Residents identify the man as 82-year-old Mohammed Salim. Paramedics find he has lost a lot of blood and waste no time blue lighting him to hospital as CSIs enter the scene.
I've been to a number of scenes like this where literally you attend the site where an incident's happened and there's nothing there, bar blood.
Detectives turn to the CSIs to understand what happened to Mohammed and what could have driven the attacker to use such violence.
Distribution of blood at a crime scene can be really important because it helps to build a story and build a pattern as to what exactly has happened. There was a small blood trail leading to potentially where he'd first been attacked and then collapsed.
The blood spatter indicates Mohammed was ambushed. Police go door to door while CSIs search through the cordon.
When you have an outdoor scene, there's lots of considerations to think about. Firstly, it's the weather. Secondly, it's trying to preserve that outdoor scene. Thirdly, it's going to be how difficult it is to search for evidence in the dark. It's late at night, but in the morning, you've got members of the public. They'll all be wanting to go to work, and there'll be a lot of traffic on the road. So time is of the essence on a scene like this.
Before Mohammed reaches hospital, he is pronounced dead from his injuries. Detectives inform his family.
I saw firsthand Mr. Salim's family and the grief they had. So we're all human, and we all have relatives. He was husband, dad, granddad. Heartbreaking. I can't imagine what it was like.
It wasn't just a loss to the family. We lost a very vital part of the community. Uncle Salim was a lovely man, big family, a lot of grandchildren. He had a very good sense of humor. He was one of the elders that you would always see whenever you came into the mosque. He would be from the first people to come in, prayed on a chair with a walking stick. He was one of the last people to leave. So he became like a pillar of this mosque. It really had an impact, I must say.
He was well respected and loved, well thought of. That had the biggest impact on me. And so this really does stick out in my mind. But as detectives, we have to keep focused. So we started a murder investigation.
He had 3 stab wounds, which appeared really deep, and it caused really catastrophic injuries, which tends to suggest that this was quite a quick, frenzied attack, and there was very little contact between the two. It's really important to try and work out where the victim has been stabbed, how many times he's been stabbed, what he's been stabbed with.
When the incident happens very quickly, the murderer won't leave much trace. There will always be some kind of trace, but it might be that minute, it's very difficult to find.
The most important thing is obviously to try and find the weapon. So not only can you tie it to the victim from blood, but you can also potentially tie it back to the offender.
As CSIs focus their search, officers need to trace Mohammed's last movements.
He went to prayers every day. He was on his way home from evening prayer at the time he was attacked.
We normally have a very large congregation coming in for the prayer. And when he then left the mosque, there were still people around. And so they were the first ones to actually hear the commotion and then come up to him and trying to help him as much as possible. But he's only lived a couple of minutes away. And he's done this journey of going back and forth from his house to the mosque at least 10 times in a day. For something like that then to happen in a matter of seconds, really shocking.
Mohammed was less than 300 meters from home. Detectives speculate why someone would attack such a vulnerable man.
At the time, there was no obvious motive. He still had his wallet with him, so it didn't look like it was a robbery.
This attack makes no sense to anyone. Here we have an elderly man who's walking home using a stick, and they've been attacked with force, brutal force. There's just no explanation.
One of the things we do in an investigation like this, we look at, have there been any similar crimes in the local area? We look at, have there been knife crime, etc. Again, there was nothing there, so there's nothing that would give us a motive for this tragic crime.
With no forensic traces found at the crime scene, detectives need a breakthrough.
Police investigations rely heavily on forensic evidence, and sometimes that evidence just isn't there. At a scene like this, where it's been such a violent attack, that must have been a very difficult conversation. The crime scene manager has to effectively say, we haven't got much evidence. We've got blood and not much else.
This was clearly a very violent attack on Mr. Salim. Obviously, with his age, very vulnerable man. It's really important to identify the person who's done this, because if they've done this to Mr. Salim, could they do this to somebody else? We'll be looking for witnesses, so we'll be doing what's called house to house. Anyone seen an actual incident or heard something, we'll also be looking for CCTV. Looking around with the cameras there, with the cameras covering the way to and from that scene. It's really important for us to find out who's done it and arrest them as quickly as we can.
"82-year-old grandfather Mohammed Salim has been stabbed and murdered while walking home. With no forensic traces at the scene, the major crime unit looked to the post-mortem for any intelligence on the murder weapon.
Looking at the victim's 3 stab wounds would give you a potential indication of what kind of weapon might have been used. And it was indicated that it was a large hunting knife that had been used to kill Mr. Salim. He had no defense injuries on his arms or any injuries on the front of his body, which immediately infers that he wasn't facing his attacker. He was either running away or walking away from somebody, and he's been attacked from behind.
This tells me that there is somebody here who targeted this elderly gentleman and for some reason had a real hatred towards him. They are driven purely by an emotion that we need to understand. The police need to explore all possible leads and all possible motivations for the attack.
As searches for the weapon continue, detectives request CCTV footage from over 60 cameras.
The whole idea of examining CCTV is not just to try and find the offence itself, but also to backtrack and forward track what's happened before the offence and after. We need to try and find the route that the offender's taken, not just into the scene, but also away from the scene.
The digital forensic team uncovers a potential lead.
As part of that CCTV trawl, we did find an image of a male running away, quite a few roads away from the scene. Were they running from the scene of a murder, or were they running from something else? We needed to trace that person. Had they seen something, or were they involved?
The footage is analysed frame by frame.
Officers tried to identify who that person is, but it wasn't a very good image. It just wasn't good enough to identify the person from it. But then looking for other CCTV to see if they could find them elsewhere in the area.
The grainy CCTV is released to the press. The effect ripples through the community.
Small Heath is a very close-knit, mainly a Muslim community. Lots of families all know each other. Lots of people worship at the mosque. So certainly it was a tremendous shock for people living in that road and that surrounding area.
It's a very nice area to live in. Beautiful vibe. I'd like to describe it as. I've been around this area for about 20 years now, so I'm quite fond of it. It's very multicultural. It's the last area where we've thought that we would feel unsafe. We have elderly and vulnerable people, just like Uncle Salim, leaving their house quite late at night for the prayer, or very early in the morning for the morning prayers. And so for something to happen here cause that level of fear and confusion.
There are growing concerns that Mohammed was deliberately targeted, and the community is under attack.
The Mr. Salim case, where we know that it's a Muslim with a visible identity, he's left his prayers, he's going home, and he's targeted. And therefore, most people believe that Mohammed Salim was not a spontaneous attack, it was a premeditated, planned attack. It's a hate crime, ultimately. The climate at the time was very kind of hostile and Islamophobic.
There was a rise in Islamophobic attacks. A lot of these sporadic attacks started to happen where ladies would have their headscarf ripped off, would be intimidated, would be verbally abused. It's a very difficult period where now you have to reassure even those who are vulnerable and try to make them comfortable and secure and safe.
There was a real sense of sadness, a real sense of fear. Visiting the mosque and other places, there was a sense of working together and unifying together and actually being careful about your safety.
The Major Crime Unit tries to alleviate the community's fears, while CSIs continue to search for any trace of Mohammed's killer.
At a scene like this, where it's been such a violent attack, there's pressure to find the evidence, but sometimes the evidence just isn't there. And it's very difficult sometimes to convey that to investigations team and the SIO. We effectively can't produce the goods. We can't produce the evidence to prove or disprove who's attacked and murdered this gentleman. We're hoping that there's further evidence or further intelligence that comes to light, which might then reignite investigations into the crime.
We very much kept an open mind. It was still a horrendous crime. We just wanted to catch the person before anything else happened.
Then, a call comes in that changes the course of the investigation.
There was a bang that evening. It was close to the Aisha Mosque in Walsall, by some railings by the side of the mosque. People who lived close by saw child lunchbox was in lots of pieces, but there were elements of what we now know as a bomb. At that time, I think it's fair to say we were all worried. A decision was made that the counter-terrorism unit would investigate that.
150 people were moved from their homes and helped by the local authority as the bomb squad was called and the area cordoned off.
Fortunately, no one is harmed. The counter-terrorism unit arrive at the scene and CSIs enter the cordon.
An explosion is a completely different type of crime scene. It's really important to try and ascertain what caused the explosions. Getting any forensic evidence from this device is crucial to that investigation. It needs to be done methodically but quickly to try and ascertain who's put the device together. Finding the component parts of a device can help detectives do further research into where those parts come from to then try and identify who's purchased these items. There are specialist forensic labs that deal with explosives. So the FEL lab, which is the Forensic Explosive Lab, that deals specifically with incendiary devices and bombs. So that lab is the lab that's used to investigate and to effectively put the device back together and work out what the component parts are of the device.
The remnants of the bomb are sent to the FEL for analysis.
An IED is an improvised explosive device, and simply it is an explosive device that is made by an individual or individuals, normally in a domestic premises or outside of a professional setting. The material that was used in this particular case is what we call a peroxide explosive. In terms of its explosive power, it has an explosive power of about 3/4 that of TNT. So it's quite a substantial charge.
But the bomber made a life-saving mistake.
The device in the incident here only partially went off. You didn't get a full involvement of all the charge that was in there. The person who's made the device hasn't been particularly good at making the chemicals that you need to cause the charge to detonate, essentially.
The person who set it hadn't got it quite right. Thankfully, the consequences could have been horrendous.
The community would be absolutely frightened. At this point, they would know that they're being targeted. There is somebody out there who have a clear hostility and prejudice towards them. The police need to contain the fear and the anxiety of the community whilst also being very focused on their investigation.
Forensics look for traces of the offender on the lunchbox that housed the bomb.
Normally, explosive devices don't cause fires. They normally just explode. Therefore, the potential for being able to find fingerprints and DNA on the component parts of the device is quite high. First thing to do on an exhibit like this would be to swab for DNA. Use a pointy swab, because the pointy swab gets into all the nooks and crannies in the grooves. I'm going to swab the zips. What you're trying to do is find out who may have handled this. The outside surface of this lunchbox is fabric, so it's very difficult to get any fingerprints from there. Potentially fingerprints some of the inside. So the powder that I'm going to use is black magnetic. And then just slowly use the powders to see if you can develop any fingerprints. I'm just running the powder over the surface to see if there's any marks. But there's no fingerprints on the inside of this section here.
The perpetrator appears to have been careful to leave no trace. The digital forensic team scours all CCTV opportunities.
Our CCTV trawl has to start where the bomb was left. So we started to look at everyone who'd walked in to that scene within the hours before the bomb went off and walked out in that time. And eventually we did identify a male. He walked in with a bag and walked out without the bag. And the bag looked very much the size of our bomb. So that was our starting point. And our starting point then goes to what we call tracking. And when he left the scene, we look at which way did he go. I call it a foot chase by CCTV. Did he go down that road? If we track every camera he went on the road, every time a car goes past, the danger is has he got in the car or not?
The digital team trawls through hours of CCTV in search of the bomber. In Small Heath, police speak to locals for any leads to Mohammed's killer. Then, another terrifying event hits the West Midlands. Exactly 3 weeks after the Walsall explosion, a second mosque is targeted.
When that bomb went off, the size of the explosion sent shrapnel quite a distance right across roads, broke windows, embedded itself in trees. Thankfully, nobody was injured. Had anyone been in the way of any of that shrapnel, they would have been severely injured, if not worse. It was happening on a Friday. It was during Ramadan. This was declared as a terrorist incident because it looked like a direct attack on a mosque.
This bomb was set to go off 10 minutes before Friday prayers were taking place. Now, Friday is an important day for the Islamic religion, and this bomb maker knew that there would be a large number of people gathering to pray at this time. So this person was intent on causing maximum impact, targeting the Islamic population.
Thankfully, because it was during Ramadan, the times of prayers had changed. Otherwise, it would have been full of people walking to and from the mosque. There would have been people in the streets outside. There would have been a number of casualties.
This event escalated it to a different level. Of course, Fridays for us is a special day. I always compare it to the Sunday for the Christians and the Saturday for the Jews. It's our special day. So we have a very large congregational prayer on Fridays. And for us not to feel safe on that day, it's a very sad thing, to be honest. Because for someone to do something to such a large gathering of people on their holy day, or on their special day, it takes a certain level of hate to then commit a crime like that.
The bomb attacks against the mosques had a similar flavor, but their violent tendencies have moved forward because they're not apprehended by the police. Maybe that gives them this willpower, this kind of idea, empowerment, that I can go out and do something more kind of damaging. And this could be them planning and plotting these bombs so that he can maim and kill more Muslims.
Looking at the days, 2 bombs we know gone off on a Friday. So our concern was it another bomb going to go off the following Friday? So this was a real critical incident.
Following the bomber's MO, the counter-terrorism team fears the next bomb will be even more powerful and could be fatal.
We've got a bomber operating in this area. We need to find out who they are before it's too late.
The West Midlands Major Crime Unit are searching for the killer of grandfather and community figure, Mohammed Salim.
It was a shock because it was the last thing that people would ever think would happen. Who in his right mind would attack an 82-year-old vulnerable man walking with a walking stick? He was a very lovely person, very strong family orientated as well. So yeah, it had a very strong impact on the community.
Counter-terrorism have deployed a team of CSIs to the scene of a second bomb attack outside a mosque in the West Midlands.
When an explosion happens, there's a huge amount of destruction. There's a lot of debris that can be thrown from quite a huge area. It's paramount to try and recover the maximum evidence. So the cordons for the area have to be set a lot wider, and the search teams have to search a lot more in the surrounding areas, looking for parts of the device or anything that might have been damaged by that device. All the vital bits of shrapnel and evidence that's come out of that bomb is recovered, because it's really important to check if there's any unique markings on any of the nuts and bolts or screws within the device. Therefore, you might be able to find out where those were made and sold, because that might tell you who your offender is.
From the radius of destruction, it's clear that this is a much more powerful device than the Walsall bomb.
The second device, essentially you're dealing with at least 0.5 kilogram of equivalent TNT. By the very virtue of the fact that they're adding additional shrapnel to a device, that indicates that you have an intention to cause harm or loss of life. The people that do this sort of thing, where they're making explosives, almost similar to serial arsonists in terms of they tend to get better at what they do the more they do it. The first or second device may or may not work so well. And then as you go through the process, they get better at making the chemicals, they get better at setting the device off. People like this can be driven to improve and get better because they're essentially practicing.
This is somebody who is intent on causing harm and fear. They are starting to build a bit more confidence at every stage, trying to make it bigger and more harmful. It is a real concern.
With the bombings just 3 weeks apart, the counter-terrorism team believe they have just 6 days left before the next attack. They must determine which of the 200 mosques in the West Midlands will be targeted next.
We recognised that there was a real threat to the Muslim community. We felt under a lot of pressure to catch this person. We were just really concerned another incident, someone else could lose their lives. Within West Midlands Police, we had officers working around the clock. The whole force was working 12-hour shifts because we had to protect our Muslim community from any more attacks.
The team's strongest lead is the grainy figure seen on CCTV at the Walsall crime scene. Searching through hundreds of hours of footage across the region, digital experts trace his movements.
When he left the scene, we tracked him all the way across Walsall into Walsall bus station and got a bus into Birmingham. He was very CCTV aware. He had a cap on. It makes it more difficult. See him get off a bus in Birmingham. He walks past the Bull Ring, quite distinctive there. And then, really coolly, he goes into a shop and buys a bottle of wine. So we're looking at the CCTV in the shop, trying to see a facial image. But he's really careful, had his head down all the time, as if he was really conscious of this. And then we tracked him out of the shop, and then he gets onto another bus. We then track that bus, and he gets off in Small Heath.
The bus stop is just meters away from where Mohammed Salim was murdered.
This is a real turning point for the investigation. Our working hypothesis was he lives somewhere in the Small Heath area. So what we then thought is, let's try and find him going out. He might not have been as careful. We tracked a lot of buses going out from Small Heath to Birmingham and then to Walsall earlier on that day, on the 21st of June. So by looking through those images, we eventually found that person and we found a full facial image of him. And this was a real breakthrough moment for us. We saw he was carrying a bag.
Police believe the bag is housing the Walsall bomb, putting everyone on the bus in danger.
The peroxide explosive HMTD has a very high shock sensitivity and a very high friction sensitivity as well. So you can initiate it with friction or shock quite easily. So it can easily be set off unintentionally if you're transporting it. So carrying it around in a bus, if you drop whatever it is you've got in your hand, is the potential with these sorts of explosives that they may detonate.
We know how easily that could have been detonated. So on a full capacity bus, the consequences would have been horrific. This suspect is taking all the risks that they need to cause maximum damage.
Detective Superintendent Sean Edwards wastes no time prioritising the bag as his next lead.
We saw the bag came from a local superstore. As detectives, we went to that supermarket and got CCTV for that day. And found him in the store on that day, coming out of the shop with the bag that we subsequently carried to Walsall. So now we had two clear facial images. It was really imperative to try and identify this person. We strongly believe that was our bomber.
With just 3 days to go before the next suspected bomb attack, the CCTV images are circulated around the West Midlands.
We put a lot of officers in the area with his photograph trying to find him. And then we circulated his photograph to the media asking who knows this person. Really surprisingly, we didn't get any calls at all. No one named him.
Detectives put all resources on the ground in Smallheath.
We targeted that area by old-fashioned detective work. So we had so many officers on there working 12 hours a day because of this threat. There was 2 local neighbourhood officers who knew the community in Smallheath. We went into this industrial area and showed these images. Do you know this person? And one of the receptionists said, yeah, that's one of the forest students who is staying here.
Just one day before the next feared bomb attack, the suspect is named as Pavlo Lapshin.
He was from Ukraine. He'd been in the country a few weeks. He was living in a adapted warehouse as part of an exchange program, which is why he wasn't known and why we didn't get any calls about him. They called on the radio that he was there and they went to arrest him. He did struggle with them, but he was quickly restrained and arrested.
A search warrant is secured for his accommodation.
The home address of the suspect was a flat above the factory. So that crime scene then becomes a huge crime scene that needs a lot of attention.
You're entering a completely unknown area or unknown scene with materials or risks that, again, are unknown. Obviously, going into anything like that is going to be inherently dangerous because you simply don't know what you're dealing with when you walk in.
The factory had to be evacuated. The neighbouring houses would need to be evacuated. You're going to have to send police officers into that scene, but there's the risk of more devices. There's the risk to human life of the members of the public. Is the address booby-trapped? It needs a lot of specialists attending, and it needs to be a very controlled and methodical examination without risk to anybody's life.
As soon as the area is evacuated, specialist search teams enter his flat.
When we searched his home, it was quite chilling. We found several other bombs. The bombs he was making seemed to increase in power. There were a number ready to go with another component, so mobile phones, chemicals, and he started putting those together. Quite a sophisticated way. He obviously knew how to put bombs together. That told us he was planning a campaign, and what we feared, that he was planning a campaign, would have come true had he not been caught.
When a house search is conducted, not only do you have to recover the component parts of the device, but also he's been seen on CCTV wearing clothing. It's really important to search the property for that clothing because forensic tests need to be done on that clothing. Is there anything that will be able to confirm what we've got at the crime scene?
Clothing, matching those seen on CCTV, is fast-tracked to the lab.
I'm going to pop the needle in the bag and suck out a portion of air. The initial investigation would be to examine if there's any contaminants, so if there's any chemical that can be detected on the air in the bag above the exhibit. And you're looking for any accelerants or volatile liquids that have seeped off the exhibit within the bag that might link back to the explosion. So then you place this into a knife tube. Secure it in an exhibit bag. These knife tubes have metal ends to prevent any movement of the exhibit and any damage. I'm now going to pop the bag open and get the item out. So I'm going to mini tape the inside, remove the surface of this tape. It reveals the sticky side to it. And then you would mini tape the area where, either around the waistband or inside of the pockets where you're most likely to get wearer's DNA. And you just pop the mini tape on the stern back into the pot.
CSIs recover all of Lapshin's personal devices.
We would look at any digital evidence, so mobile phones, computers, they would be seized and downloaded by digital forensics teams so that we can ascertain exactly what searches he's been doing. The digital forensics teams are incredible. They can recover a lot of evidence from a digital device, even if it looks like it's been deleted.
They prioritise his laptop.
By looking at that, we found quite a wealth of evidence against him. On there, he'd been searching himself. The mosques that he targeted, he'd done a Google search of those. He'd looked at how to get to and from them. So we could see that it had been meticulously planned.
Among Lapshin's files, investigators make a disturbing discovery.
Chillingly, he'd also searched details on the murder of Mohammed Salim. And in there we found a photograph of him holding a knife, which the pathologist said that is the type of knife that would have caused those injuries. So we believe this was a knife that killed Mohammed Salim. And this for us was quite a remarkable moment because we could see that clearly he would be the main suspect for both the murder and the bombings.
Police have arrested Pavlo Lapshin for 2 bomb attacks outside mosques in the West Midlands. And now evidence points to him also being the killer of 82-year-old Mohammed Salim.
It was on the 29th of April.
Я был в районе мечети.
I was around the mosque.
Его я не знал.
I did not know that person.
Убийство было совершено по мотивам расовой ненависти.
A murder was committed on the basis of racial hatred.
Нанес 3 удара ножом.
I used a knife. I stabbed him 3 times.
When we interviewed Pavlo Lapshin through an interpreter, he admitted what he'd done, but he's very proud of what he'd done. And when we asked why he'd done it, he said, because he's not white and I am white, I wanted to increase racial conflict. So a real chilling motive for the murder of Mohammed Salim. We were all monitoring the interview. He said to us, yeah, I set all 3 bombs off. And that was news to us because we only knew the 2. When we asked him about the other one, he told us it was one in Wolverhampton. He gave us details of it. He set on a roundabout by the mosque in Wolverhampton. That hadn't been reported to the police previously. We sent officers to the scene, looked at the roundabout and found fragments of a small explosion that had gone off there.
The discovery of fragments of a device on this roundabout opposite the mosque showed there'd been an explosion there several weeks ago. The 3rd time a Muslim place of prayer had been targeted in the last month.
Those 2 crimes, in terms of MO, as it were, might be different, but the motivation behind them is exactly the same, just pure racism.
Lapshin actually says that he wants a race war. This was all about biological superiority, this idea that people of color were inferior to people who were white. He wanted to be part of this idea of him being a soldier fighting for this greater cause against the Muslim invaders. As a soldier, Lapshin can justify his actions because he legitimizes the victims.
On the 22nd of July, Pavlo Lapshin is charged with the terrorist-related murder of Mohammed Salim.
Having the knife would have been the icing on the cake. However, he'd already admitted it. He told us things that he didn't, that only the murderer would know. We have pictures of him holding a knife, which the pathologist said that is the type of knife that would have caused those injuries. So we were very confident the evidence we had.
Even though the offender's admitted the crime, at any stage, he might turn up in court and then say, oh, not guilty. And therefore, we have to have prepared a case to be able to still prove beyond reasonable doubt that this is our offender and this is what he's done.
We didn't know whether he would want to have his day in court to espouse his ideology. So that was our concern, and we planned for a trial. We wanted to clearly show this was a racist, a terrorist, intent on causing fear amongst the Muslim community and actually murdered Mr. Salim. So I sent staff out to Ukraine to liaise with the Ukrainian authorities just to understand more about Pavlo Lapshin. What we found was a young man who'd been at university, had done very well at university, so much so he'd got on an exchange programme to come to the UK. We know when we're speaking to local police that he'd been trying setting off bombs in the Ukraine just to test and experiment. He'd been dealt with for what they termed as a health and safety incident, where we'd actually blown his kitchen up in his house. He obviously knew how to put bombs together. When we looked at his laptop, there were photos of quite large explosions that we found out were in Ukraine. These were bombs he'd set off. But in the UK, he wasn't successful. I think part of the issue was his English wasn't brilliant, so translating the chemicals he had in Ukraine to the chemicals in the UK may have accounted for them not going off quite right, but he was obviously honing his skills, honing his English, his chemistry knowledge.
Detectives work with Ukrainian authorities to establish if Lapshin was part of any terrorist groups.
It's also really important to see if there's any other offenders. Has he been working alone, or are there other people within his network? And if so, they need to be identified and arrested.
Police are finding a lot of literature around online radicalization. They find lots of white supremacist memorabilia. He's searching white supremacist websites. He uses that as an inspiration. He's radicalizing himself. And this is why people call him a lone wolf.
We were very confident nobody else was involved. We were very confident he was what we call self-initiated terrorist. He wasn't directed by anybody else. But I think he thought he maybe was cleverer than us. He took great steps. He was very forensically aware. He never took a mobile phone with him because he knew we'd use that. And equally, with both the murder and the bombings, he washed everything in high-strength vodka because he thought that got rid of most of the forensic traces. He did think he got away with it, as it were, and was planning on carrying on.
Lapshin's search history reveals that before moving to the UK, he was researching where he could buy explosive chemicals. Just 2 days after moving to Smallheath, he brought a large hunting knife, which matches the fatal injuries inflicted on Mohammed Salim.
The police can see search histories related to 2 years ago what he's planning. So when he comes to the UK, he finds a victim, unfortunately in this case Mohammed Salim, and then he's motivated to commit that act of violence. So although it only takes him days to commit this act of terrorism, in fact he's been planning this over a very long time before.
Even though in both of these crime scenes there wasn't much physical traditional forensic evidence, fingerprints, DNA, footprints, tyre marks, there's always digital evidence.
At trial, Lapshin pleads guilty to the 3 bombings and to the racially motivated murder of Mohammed Salim. He is sentenced to life, with a minimum of 40 years.
The evidence we had was overwhelming. But he showed no remorse for this. An elderly man who was well respected and loved, taken away for a horrible racist motive.
The tragic death of Mr. Salim had a huge impact. The murder teaches us lots of different lessons, and part of those is trying to come together as a community, as one. We need to unite when it comes to incidents like this. Terrorism tries to create a psychological fear, and we need to show that as a community, as a group, we're not afraid, and that you don't have to be Muslim to be impacted by Islamophobia. It's a hate crime, ultimately, and a hate crime has no place in any society.
At the end of a case like that, from a policing perspective, it is a satisfaction to see a dangerous terrorist go to prison for the rest of his life and keep people safe. That's why we joined the police service. But part of that, you take away with you the family, and I can't imagine the grief and loss that Mr. Salim's family went through.
Uncle Salim always had that very contagious smile. He'd always be open to speak to people and give advice. He's a very lovely man, very respectable man, and very respected as well.
you.